I chose to be a lawyer and ultimately a judge because I find endless challenge in the complexities of the law. I firmly believe in the rule of law as the foundation for all our basic rights. For as long as I can remember, I have been inspired by the achievement of our founding fathers. They set forth principles that have endured for more than 2 centuries. Those principles are as meaningful and relevant each generation as the generation before. It would be a profound privilege for me to play a role in applying these principles to the questions and controversies we face today. Although I grew up in a very modest and challenging circumstances, I consider my life to be immeasurably rich. I was raised in a Bronx public housing project, but studied at two of the nation's finest universities. I did work as an assistant district attorney, prosecuting violent crimes that devastate our communities. But then I joined a private law firm and worked with the international corporations doing business in the United States. I've had the privilege of serving as a federal district court trial judge, and I am now serving as a federal appellate court judge. That was Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And this is AllMinucOne. Please, folks, if you enjoy this content, like, share, and subscribe. So I brought this quote up specifically because this is a woman, though she says things here, certain platitudes that I don't think that she actually believes. She does talk about how she strived to do well in life despite having been raised in a public housing project. Now, I didn't go into a long background of where this comes from. How long she was, I know where the speech came from was when Obama nominated her, but how long she was in public housing, what struggles she had, where she came from, all that stuff. I don't care so much. I mean, we could talk about it. We could say, that people who are poor and underprivileged don't get as many opportunities. I think that may have some truth to it. But more importantly, I am concerned with the ideas that the left are perpetuating out there about things like improving neighborhoods, such as gentrification. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because if you've watched the BLM movement, they've been going around to neighborhoods that are nice and developed, and people are trying to enjoy themselves at restaurants and bars outside as best they can during this corona apocalypse nonsense. And they are yelling at them that people of color used to live in these areas. Well, I'm going to break some of this down, and I can tell you, they still do. And the real question I want you to think about is, how do we actually help people who are less fortunate? Do we do it through government programs like the projects, like government housing, like Section 8 subsidies? Or do we do it through development and capitalism? So, with that, my first article is from this National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and it says shifting neighborhoods. So this is the leftist perspective, the progressive perspective. Gentrification and cultural displacement in America's cities. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute, because what culture are we displacing? Poverty, the culture of poverty, the culture of government subsidies, the culture of crime. What are we looking at as far as gentrification and displacement? So this was in 2019. Executive summary. Gentrification is a powerful force for economic change in our cities, but it is often accompanied by extreme and unnecessary cultural displacement. While gentrification increases the value of properties in the areas that surfaced from prolonged disinvestment, it also results in raising rents, home, and property values. Okay. Why is that a bad thing? See, it's saying prolonged disinvestment. Well, if you invest, you get gentrification. If you don't invest, you just remain in a ghetto. Sorry, folks, that's what it is. As these rising costs reduce the supply of affordable housing, existing residents, who are often Black and Hispanic, are displaced. One, they may be Black or Hispanic, but what are you saying? Are you saying that Blacks and Hispanics cannot afford rent at a higher rate? See, this this is that soft bigotry of low expectation. Ugh. This prevents them from benefiting from the economic growth and greater availability of service that come with increased investment. Gentrification presents a challenge to communities that are trying to achieve economic revitalization without the disruption that comes with displacement. So then it talks about some studies I don't really care to go over. And the reason why is because the studies all say that gentrification is not just nominally good for the neighborhoods, but exceptionally. They do so much for the people that live in the neighborhoods, for local businesses, for people who would like to get work who maybe didn't have it before. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to a ghetto. I have many a times been through Baltimore. I've had to work down there many a times. There are nice areas in Baltimore, the north side to some extent, outside of town, more or less, more of the suburbs, or the outer skirts. Kimberly Klasick was on the Timcast IRL podcast the other day and was talking about a lot of the things that she wished to do for Baltimore. But one of the nice areas that still existed was around the University of Maryland hospital system and the Inner Harbor. That supposedly is all disappearing, most likely because of Corona. Large portions of Baltimore have dilapidated and falling apart housing, empty housing, all kinds of things. And the city has been run by Democrats for decades. In fact, the whole state of Maryland has been run by Democrats for decades. We have a Republican governor there now, but I mean, Republican primarily in name only. And I believe up until the 2000s, they have had nothing but Democratic governors for the 40 years prior. So I bring all this up just to say that maybe we should be actually considering that gentrification is not a bad thing, unlike the crazy leftists who think it's simply displaced people. Would you rather live in a ghetto or would you rather live in a nice area? So let's look at this. This is from The Atlantic. This is from 2015. This is what happens after a neighborhood gets gentrified. Displacement is becoming a larger issue in knowledge hubs and superstar cities. So it says, back in 2014, Spike Lee famously expressed his disdain for the forces of gentrification in New York. Why does it take an influx of white New Yorkers from the South Bronx, in Harlem, in Bed-Stuy, in Crown Heights, for the facilities to get better? He argued. What about the people who are renting? They can't afford it anymore. Lee's criticism now reflect a familiar narrative in cities all over the U.S. as wealthier residents flow back into once low-income, often minority neighborhoods. Longtime residents can be priced out. It does happen. It is much rarer than you think, as this Atlantic article will discuss. Now, I wanted to show you this. This is from all sides, in case anyone had any doubts. The Atlantic is a left-leaning newspaper. It's been around in the United States for quite a long time, but make no mistake that it is left-leaning. It is not any sort of right-wing propaganda or anything else. They would be quite fair. And here in 2015, they were getting quite woke, but this article is quite fair with plenty of research links. So it says here, but exactly how does this dynamic play out? And is displacement inevitable? A new comprehensive review of what we know about gentrification sheds much needed light on this heated issue. Now, this is a link. This link brings up a study. And there are numerous links of studies within this article. It talks about a review by researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, and UCLA, published by the Federal Reserve of San Francisco, takes a close look at studies of gentrification and displacement over the past several decades. It talks about how they wrote about it. It helps us better understand several questions related to gentrification and displacement. Just how intensive is displacement? Exactly what kinds of people are displaced? And how do people of groups fare after they leave gentrified neighborhoods? The earliest studies of displacement, conducted in the 1980s, generated wide a variety of estimates of how people are displaced by gentrification. And a 1982 study, again linked directly to the study, found that roughly 1% of all Americans, 5% of families, and 8.5% of urban families are displaced from their homes between the 1970 and 1977 by either eviction, public action, sale, or reoccupation. Now, 1% of all Americans, 5% of families, and 8% of 8.5% of urban families. You have to understand that gentrification is not a unified issue. It's not happening everywhere, in every city, in every place. A 1983 study of 5 cities, Boston, Cincinnati, Richmond, Seattle, and Denver, found that nearly a quarter, 23% of residents in those urban neighborhoods were displaced due to eviction, increased rent, or the fact that the house they were renting was sold between 1978 and 1980. Similarly, 2001 study of gentrification area of the area of Boston by Jacob Vigdor found evidence of heightened housing turnover in gentrified neighborhoods. Now, here's the thing. These are very specific studies in very specific areas. This is not nationwide, and this is not adjusting for the ethnicity of the people. It also isn't showing the ethnicity of the people that remain within the areas. See, when you're starting to judge a question, you can't assume, like a bigot, that the people of these areas are, all minorities. Well, so we can't assume that these people are often black or Hispanic, as it says here. There are all kinds of people who are poor and has little to do with their race, or at least less to do with their race, and largely to do with their lifestyle choices. Poverty, my friends, is largely a mindset. Now, you could argue that with me. If I drop you off somewhere in some third world nation, probably not going to be true, because of the barriers to gaining wealth. In the United States, though, however, if you get a good job, you invest your money well, you don't do stupid things with it. If you do what the Brookings Institute suggests, which is not have children before getting married and graduating high school, you will not live in poverty. Now, if you blow all your money on dumb things, you might live in poverty. If you aren't willing when you're young to live with people, you might live in poverty because you have a cool fat pad in the cool fat area. But that cool area is probably out of your price range. And that's another thing that this is not taking into account. That people, when they're young, are poorer. When I got out of the Marine Corps and I got married to my first wife, I inherited immediately two kids with that. And I worked at a photo lab until I got a job with the sheriff's department. I did that for 10 months. My wife at the time did not work. I think I made $25,000 a year. We were poor. The only assistance that we got was WIC, and almost everybody gets WIC while she was pregnant. This happens. This is how it is. 7 years later, my ex-wife and I, at the time, together, combined income, were making nearly 6 figures a year. That wasn't a very long time. And we didn't always do, especially her, didn't always do well with our money. You have to understand, though, this is how things work. As you get older, you will gain wealth. Let's get back to this article. Perhaps the foremost student of gentrification and displacement is Lance Freeman of Columbia University in his 2004 study of with Frank Barracconi found that poor households in gentrified neighborhoods of New York City were less likely to move than poor households in non-gentrified neighborhoods. Isn't that interesting? So people in poor households in non-gentrified neighborhoods move more often. This, of course, may have to do with the fact that there are fewer poor households in gentrified neighborhoods to begin with. Also, what you're saying is that those people who live in the gentrified neighborhoods, those neighborhoods that are being gentrified, they weren't that poor in the first place. Interesting. Clarifying facts. Very important, people. Very important when you look at these studies. You cannot just take people's words for it. You cannot just say, oh, gentrification's bad, it displaces people, and go, oh my, that emotionally appeals to me. Let me believe you, therefore, then. No, doesn't work that way. You have to use your brain. Suspend all belief. So you get sucked into the occult. So let's see. Still, the authors concluded that a neighborhood could go from a 30% poverty population to 12% in as few as 10 years without any displacement whatsoever. That's exactly what I was talking about. Interestingly, the neighborhood that I lived in with my ex-wife until, I finally had enough and just, moved on. When that was, I grew up in that neighborhood as a kid, and during the 90s and the early 2000s, it wasn't that bad. It had become poorer and worse of a neighborhood. When I moved there, it was like a lower to middle class to like, not quite upper, but middle class neighborhood, good working class neighborhood. It was going downhill hardcore the last few years that I was there. So let's see. In a subsequent study in 2005, Freeman found that the probability that a household would be displaced in a gentrified neighborhood was merely 1.3%. Following up in 2007, they examined the overturn in New York City, the apartment overturn neighborhoods, and found that the probability of displacement declined as the rate of rent inflation increased in the neighborhood. Disadvantaged households in gentrified neighborhoods were actually 15% less likely to move than those in non-gentrified households. So when BLM says, oh, black people used to live here, they don't know what they're talking about. They're speaking gibberish. Or people of color used to live here, whatever. I hate that terminology. You might as well just say colored people. It's the same freaking thing. I don't care what you want to put first or whatever your excuses are for saying it. In any case, it says, a 2009 study, Freeman found that gentrifying neighborhoods are becoming more racially diverse by tracking neighborhood change from 1970 to 2000. Although he does note that cities overall are becoming more diverse as well. Freeman also discovered that changes in educational diversity were the same for both gentrifying and non-gentrifying areas. Ultimately, while some residents were displaced from the 70s to the 2000s, they were generally more diverse when it came to income, race, and education as opposed to non-gentrified areas. Isn't that quite interesting, my friends? Go read this for yourself. 2015 from The Atlantic. Under politics, the title is, This is What Happens After a Neighborhood Gets Gentrified. Now, I brought this up specifically just to show how ridiculously insane the left is about their politics and what they believe. They sit there and they espouse falsities. They say things without fact all the time. And what is your alternative choice? Public housing? Ghettos? What is your alternative choice, people? You say, well, we don't want people investing in neighborhoods. And at the same time, you say, well, we don't want gentrification. We don't want people gentrifying. It displaces people. It displaces almost nobody. The people it does displace probably weren't good tenants in the first place. And I don't care what you think when I say that. It's true. I'm not talking about anything about people's races here. I'm not talking about their ethnicity. I'm talking about their work ethic. And I understand things do happen to people. Things certainly happen. I am not one to know, not to know what struggle is, especially monetarily. Been through it. Here from Slate, also, all sides here, very left wing. It says the myth of gentrification. It's extremely rare and not as bad for the poor as you think. This is January 2015. When was the Atlantic article written? September 2015. And this kind of goes down through some of this. The first summer festival, June 2014 in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Now, I'll tell you another thing that happened in New York specifically is they got rid of all the crime. And that was a big issue. Giuliani came in and cleaned up the city. Before that, Times Square was not the place. Well, it's going back. It's going back to the 70s. It's going back to the early 80s. It's going back. But Times Square was not the place that it is now. It was a place full of heroin addicts and pornography and just crime-ridden. You couldn't go into Central Park. New York was dangerous. It's becoming dangerous again. I found this interesting from the Baltimore Sun, being familiar, very familiar with Baltimore. There's a great gyro place there. Whatever, Greek food. There's a big Greek population in Baltimore. So if you like Greek food, it's a good place to go. And I like a gyro. They're very, very tasty. And so one of the best joints there is basically in this super dilapidated ghetto kind of scary area. And that is much of Baltimore, guys. It's so much of Baltimore. So let's read this briefly. New study links crime rate to public housing relocation efforts. This is from the Baltimore Sun, 2012. What happens when cities tear down public housing? The issue has played out in Baltimore and major cities across the country. A new study out this month by the Urban Institute from Emory University reveals that the latest on the subject. It's an attempt to answer the empirical evidence, whether a common prediction is true, that teardowns contribute to crime waves in the neighborhoods where the former public housing families settled. I would say no. I would say there's already crime there, and the idea that people aren't sure where they're going to go or they have to move is the real issue. It is not a simple answer, the authors conclude. They looked at efforts in Chicago and Atlanta. Crime declined dramatically in both cities throughout the 2000s, even in neighborhoods that received many relocated households, they wrote. However, the picture is not entirely positive. The transformations contributed to slightly higher property crime overall in Chicago. And some neighborhoods in both cities have experienced problems associated with concentrations of relocated households. Once the number of relocated households reached a certain threshold, crime rates on average decreased less than they would have if there had been no former public housing in movers. Chicago Housing Authority's plan for transformation relocating some 6,400 families between 1999 and 2008 form public housing to private housing, which is a good thing. People shouldn't be in public housing. Public housing is not a good thing. There are ways to help people who do not have a home, by the way, and I don't think it's through government intervention in public housing. That just is the welfare dependency route, and some people will get away from it, but many people will just live off that sweet, sweet government dole. Relocating the public housing residents in Chicago is credited with decreasing overall violent crime by 1% and a 4.4% drop in gun crime. I would assume, if I had the data brought up, that that's just nonsense, that drop in crime would be correlated directly with the overall national drop in crime throughout the United States, because Chicago has been in the top 10 murder capitals in the United States for decades. A 4.4% drop is nothing. That's a nothing drop. In Atlanta, the relocation efforts are credited with dropping violent crime by 0.7%. Again, almost over a decade, 7-year period. This is ridiculous. Almost to one whole percentage point. I don't think so. I don't think that you can literally figure that out. The impact on neighborhoods with the demolished public housing was substantial, especially in Chicago. Violent crime plummeted more than 60%, and property crime dropped nearly 50% according to the studies. Now that's different. That's a significant number. Relocation efforts had basically no impact on neighborhoods where the number of relocated families was low, the authors found, but relatively small numbers. There was a ripple effect. Neighborhoods with a moderate concentration of relocated families had a violent crime rate 11% higher in Atlanta and 13% higher in Chicago. So, again, I could go through all of this. I don't really care. We could look at the study. I'll bring it up real quick to see what it. Well, doesn't want to load. So the main thing that I wanted to bring up here was that this is from the Baltimore Sun. Looked at these efforts, and really what they're saying is their data was all over the place. And what I'm trying to tell you is that, look, everybody knows that like areas with high welfare, public housing, poverty are usually crime areas. And a lot of those people are committing crime because they choose to commit crime, not because they're poor. They can blame it on being poor. You know, I was talking to my buddy the other day about so many guys that I would know who are regulars at the jail that would, you know, be in and out of the system. I'd see out in town or at a bar, at the gas station, at a restaurant or something. They have their big old fat gangster wallet on, a couple $1,000s, more money than I had in my bank account. And, you know, they spend that money on shoes and clothes and cars and girls and whatever. And they all lived in the ghetto. And not a single one of them decided to invest into a home or to start a bank account or to do any of those things that would help them get out of that impoverished life. Now, I've also in the past have heard stories of, you know, let's say drug dealers and whatnot that were able to do, let's say, exactly that, where they saved up their money and they did the right thing. But most of these guys, they want to live these hard and fast and fun lives. So anyways, again, leftist propaganda, the Washington Post. Democracy dies in darkness. How Section 8 became a racial slur. Brief history of public housing in America. Now, when it comes to stuff like this, I don't really care to read. This is from 2015. It says, coded language by definition conveys much saying, very little. And so, those words allegedly uttered in McKinney texts before a confirmation between, police and black teens go back to your Section 8 home invokes a particular and vivid set of assumptions. I wonder if that's anything like the assumptions of these people right here, the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Pretty sure they're a left-wing organization who are often black and Hispanics that are displaced. I wonder if it has any sort of similar coded language as that. It's okay. We just want to call it out that it displaces black and brown people to have communities brought up economically and businesses brought to them and homes repaired and, nice little coffee shops and cafes and whatever else around, little shopping districts. But this is just terrible. Section 8, go back to your Section 8 housing. Or maybe it's just because they were people of that mindset. I brought this up just because I wanted you all to see the difference between what happens with gentrification and poverty. This is South Africa, people. This, again, from The Guardian, wants to talk about apartheid's legacy. This has nothing to do with apartheid. This has to do with socialism versus capitalism. Within the South African system, there is a dual system. The impoverished people, the poor people who live in the ghettos have huge amounts of socialism and social welfare. And the people that live in the cities and the nice parts of the cities, they live off of a capitalistic system. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look it up. These are all the nice neighborhoods. Right on the other side, ghettos. And I mean real ghettos, not like American ghettos. Although they're not shacks, but some parts of Baltimore, man, pretty gross. Here we got all these people that got land. Right there, you got ghettos. It's in Cape Town. Same thing. Nice people living by the lake. And over here, a few hundred yards away, we got ghettos. We have dual lives. The idea of being on the other side of the tracks, if you would. Again, look at this. These people started building this little spiral here. There's an entrance here. You see that? Like dirty, nasty water coming through. How undeveloped and trashy that looks. And then you have nice homes here. You know, I don't understand all the details about poverty in South Africa, but I know it isn't because of apartheid alone. In fact, they've been kind of reversing that and going back toward it in South Africa because it's been away from it for a long time. Obviously, here you see a golf course and then this other ghetto. So before I wrap up here, I just want to show you a few things. This is really nice, I think. This is we need to see more of this. This is a facility down in Florida that helps with homeless people, and they actually provide them with jobs and whatever else. They have certain responsibilities. They have to be drug tested. So I'm just going to let this play, and you all can decide for yourself, how do we help out people who are impoverished? Do we
There we go.
give them the fish, or do we teach them how to fish?
Back, no matter how we lost them. You know, we want to get back into an apartment, into our homes, or in our own income.
For 10 years, Eric Nickel held a steady job as a retail store manager before a tragic twist of fate pushed him out on the streets.
Last Christmas, my wife and daughter were...
I want you guys to notice the ethnicity of this gentleman here. I'm not going to say anything more about that.
killed by a drunk driver, and I ended up coming here. I just didn't have friends, didn't have family. I had been disabled, hadn't been able to work in like 4 years. I had an injured spine, so she was kind of supporting us. And then when she was killed, I had to leave the apartment. I wasn't on the lease. The only car was destroyed in the crash.
Nickel moved into a hotel, but soon ran out of money. An internet search of homeless shelters led him here, to Pinellas Hope. Set up by a Catholic charity network, this is a cost-effective solution to a pandemic problem. The 13-acre tent community, established in 2007, provides shelter and support for more than 300 of Tampa's homeless.
You got seconds, hand down. If you didn't, keep it up, please.
So we're like a little small city. What works is that when the individuals come in, the majority of them have an idea in their mind that they don't matter and that no one cares. And we establish with them that we do care and that they matter. And we instill in our clients a sense of worth and also a sense of community.
See, that's important, because if you think you're going to be poor, you think you're going to be helpless, you think that because, let's say, your ethnicity, that because of your heritage, that nobody cares about you, that you have all these disadvantages, you're going to be in the wrong, proper mindset to be successful.
Due to a lean business model, operating costs are only about $12 a day per resident, about half the amount of most other shelters.
We feel like anybody who starts something up after us and talks to us is going to save a ton of money and time, because we can tell them all the things that don't work, but we also can tell them what does work and what is important.
Part of the secret of Pinellas Hope's success is attributed to Tampa's year-round warm climate. Most of the residents stay in tents, which means no construction or maintenance expenses. The extra cash is spent on drug and alcoholism rehabilitation, technical education, and career services. On January 19th of 2007, when the housing market began to crumble and homelessness rates surged, the St. Petersburg Police Department shut down a South Main tent city, calling it a fire hazard. A week later, another sprung up, and police used box cutters to slash the tents apart.
In that particular instance, there were some homeless individuals.
By the way, you may not be able to live on public lands in such a way, depending on your state, local laws, or whatever. But the police have no right to do this. This is your personal property, and this is violating your, constitutional rights. But that's the kind of stuff that I have issue with when it comes to policing services and the forgetfulness we have for our Constitution.
They happened to be on city property, and the city decided that they wanted them to go away. So in order to have these folks go away, they came up with the wonderful idea of slashing their home, which was their tents.
These are the police that are taking our tents.
This was the inspiration for founding Pinellas Hope. But unlike the impromptu tent cities, residents here don't stay for free. They're required to do chores, which not only cuts costs, but also boosts morale.
I ended up working in the kitchen, and then I've been one of the kitchen leads now for like 7-8 months. It's something I can actually physically do.
This creates community, folks. It creates responsibility. So what you don't get with Section 8 or public housing is community or responsibility.
I have a lot of helpers, so I can still do something for the camp, do something for the people in the camp.
And no one joins the community unless they want to.
You have to go through a background check. You have to go through drug and alcohol, like breathalyzers, and do like a drug test, and then you actually have to want it. Like you have to want to be.
Do we do any of that for public housing? See, with gentrification, we don't have to do any of that because, well, it's a natural process of the neighborhood and everyone in the neighborhood being enriched by it. From public housing, Section 8, none of this happens. So how do you stop the perpetuation of it?
Better your life.
At first, 20-year-old Darian Lee wasn't sure if Pinellas Hope was right for him.
I'm gonna be honest. I was like, no, I'm not coming there. I'm not a type of person that does woods and tents and stuff.
He dropped out of college and was kicked out of his mother's house because of his drug and alcohol abuse. After 2 weeks on the street, he was put into a rehabilitation program. A social worker recommended Pinellas Hope.
I expected to be like, oh, these people are just here to pretty much like accept a paycheck, not really truly care. But that's like the opposite. They care too much, if that makes sense. I feel like I don't want to let them down by not actually doing it because everything they do for me. So it's like, I have no choice but to do it.
Community, folks. Community is so powerful. And this is what you find actually with gangs. This is why the ghetto areas have so much crime and gang violence, because young men specifically are finding community there, and women. Often the young ladies, find some sort of worth and value in their sexuality and that kind of lifestyle. And I'm telling you, I know, because I know these people. You spend 8 hours a day, 6 days a week with people, sometimes 16 hours a day. For years, for over a decade, and you know them, you get to know them. And I worked with both men and women. There was a period of time where I was an education major, and I was doing tutoring, and I was tutoring middle school kids, and I had 6th and 7th graders that 7th graders specifically, I remember, he might have even been in 8th grade, but nobody paid attention to. His parents never helped him out, and he couldn't read. And I got him to read after about an hour or so, like a basic page of Dr. Seuss type stuff. And he was so proud of himself and so happy. And why would he ever want to read before that, though, if no one's encouraged him? And he was kind of a punk kid, but he listened to me because I wasn't going to put up with his nonsense. I got that military bearing discipline stuff going on. So, in any case, my point is that this community is important. Discipline is important. Hope in something is important. And when you're just given something by the government, you don't care about it. It's not important.
The camp helped Lee earn his GED.
I always decorated for Halloween and Christmas with my daughter, so I figured that once I got in here with power, I was going to keep doing it.
As for Eric Nickel, he now attends an area college for web design and hopes to land a job within a year.
I just finished my first term of school right now. I just finished. I start my second term tomorrow, actually. I made a promise to my daughter years ago that if anything ever happened, I would keep going. So I keep going.
So, folks, that's a case right there of people doing the right thing to help other people out. It's not public housing. Gentrification does the same thing because as your community comes up, you go, oh, this is an investment in my community. I live here. I'm part of this community. I like this neighborhood. Remember, as I was saying earlier in this video, people sit there and they go, hey, I like where I'm at. I like my neighborhood. I'm seeing this change here and I want to live here, even though it's more expensive. And the people who may be displaced maybe need to get their lives together. See, one of the beautiful things about a market society is it creates a check on things that otherwise human compassion would not, because people are too nice sometimes, too often. And I know people don't like to hear that, but I absolutely believe you need to help out your neighbor, but there is a time and a place and a way to do things properly. So with that all said, this has been AllMinucOne. Please, folks, like, share, and subscribe. I decided to put my major shilling here at the end instead of the beginning, so we could just get to it. So if you guys want to watch a live show every Wednesday, 7 p.m., TheEnds Justify the memes over on DLive, ends_justify_memes. Or you can watch replays over at TheEnds Justify the memes on YouTube. Also, if you guys want to help me out, help my family out, if you like my content, go over to Subscribestar and consider subscribing, and I will set up tiers for you all, and we will we'll figure out some special things that we can do for you. With all that, I hope you enjoyed this. This has been AllMinucOne, and I wish you all well.